we are going to talk a little bit about what we advertised at the end of the session, but what we have the opportunity tonight is to hear from some members of the NHS England NHS Improvement team about priority pieces of work for them and the future, which I think is certainly worth us paying attention to and asking questions of. As with previous sessions, this particular session is sponsored by Optus, so I give my thanks to them. Over the course of the session, you'll have the opportunity to pose questions to the panel. At the bottom of your screen, you'll see the Q&A box. If you want to post any questions in there, I will then pose those to the panel once the initial presentation is completed. Also, we're going to record the session as we have done other ones. And then a recording of this will be hosted on the LOCSU YouTube channel, which will enable LOCs to post this or flag this to people who've not been able to attend, so they can watch it later at their leisure. So without further ado, what I'd like to do is invite Gabby Darby, who is the Director of Primary Care Transformation at NHS England and NHS Improvement, to pop her screen on. And she will talk through the priority areas for NHS England and NHS Improvement in the future. Following that, we will have a discussion afterwards. So Gabby, are you able to put your screen on? Thank you.
Thanks.
Presentation will come up on screen, and over to you.
Thanks very much, Richard. Right, pleasure to be here. As you mentioned, I'm the Director of Primary Care Commissioning Transformation at NHS England and Improvement. If we just go on to the next slide, I'm just going to take you through a relatively brief presentation around the things that we're working on at the moment, and then we'll open this up to questions. So the first thing is to say all of the work that has been going on due to COVID. Thank you for your patience throughout this period. I know that some of the communication may have felt slow at times, but we thank you for your very quick responsiveness throughout the period. We've been very focused on this as a central team and have put in place the COVID urgent eye care services within a very rapid period in under 4 weeks, in order to make sure that everybody who needed it had access to urgent eye care services. Have supported the setup of over 5,000 new NHS mail accounts in order to enable sign up to the PPE portal. And 4,000 practices have now been invited to register for PPE via that online portal, with 2,407 having done so, and I'm sure that number is increasing all the time. We've worked closely with ONFNC throughout the pandemic to manage the response. And just want to say again, as in the recent letter, a very big thank you to all of you for everything that you've done, working with patients throughout this time, and making sure that they get the care that they need. Can we move on to the next slide, please? We've made average monthly payments to 3,800 practices during lockdown, and extended those through to September. And we have a process in place to support practices operating in areas of greatest deprivation still, as well as to support all domiciliary providers. Next slide, thank you. The recovery data is looking strong. So what you can see here is the lockdown, that major dip in the lockdown period starting in April 2020. And continuing through to June, and then a build up to about 50% of normal activity in July, and then a really strong increase through August, September, and October. And to some extent, that increase is higher than we expected to see, and it would be understandable if there are practices who are not able to be delivering the same number of eye tests and throughput as they were pre-pandemic. The other thing that you'll notice in this slide is the major increase in use of the online submission and claims here. And if we go on to the next slide, just to show you a little bit more detail on that, we've now got around 36% of practices using EGOS, and that number is going up rapidly, and then we expect for that to be up to 80 or 90% of practices by the end of the year. Next slide, thank you. Right. Now, another digital programme to talk about. Funding has recently been confirmed to support referral and image sharing pathways, which we're rapidly working with our regional teams on the implementation plan for, alongside the National Outpatient Transformation Programme. Several pathways have been prioritised as part of the COVID restoration plan to enable a dialogue between secondary care and primary care clinicians supported by image sharing solutions. And we'll get this in place by giving commissioners access to a dynamic procurement system on which we'll encourage a number of suppliers to apply and be accredited. And then our commissioners will run mini competitions locally in order to make sure that those solutions are in place and meet local needs. The next thing to say is, I think it was at this conference last year, there was a video shared describing the special school eye care service, and this was planned to launch earlier in the year, interrupted due to COVID, but we're currently re-establishing contact with the schools who expressed interest and expect this to be online soon. Next slide. And finally, it may be that you've picked up the recent publication of a consultation document launched by NHS England, which relates to the future of integrated care systems. It describes a series of ambitions for better integrating care and building on the COVID response and the strong partnerships that have formed at ICS level and also more locally at place level in order to deliver that response. The consultation also builds on previous work on potential legislative reform that would support ICSs to take an increasing responsibility for planning and strategic commissioning of local services. In this document, what you'll see is, alongside those policy ambitions, two options described for how legislation may be changed to support those ICSs take a firmer footing in future. One that looks at ICSs operating with an accountable officer and otherwise current commissioning largely staying in place, and another that looks at a more radical option involving ICSs being formed as statutory bodies. And we're inviting views on these proposals between now and the 8th of January. And I would just say that it will be interesting to hear thoughts in the discussion about this after this presentation, and that I would encourage you to go away and have a look at that consultation and to share your views, because this is something that could, I think, have a positive impact in terms of integrating optical services within an ICS and within a place-based system. And with that, I will open up for questions and comments. Thank you.
Thanks, Gabby. If I can invite Richard Everett and Carol Reese to turn their cameras on. To NOC veterans, Richard and Carol will be no strangers. So Carol, currently Head of Primary Care, Dental and Optical Commissioning, and Richard, as we were discussing earlier, is that with a job title that just rolls off the tongue, Senior Programme Lead for Optical Services Commissioning. Carol and Richard are going to take questions alongside Gabby as they come in, and they have already started to come in really quite quickly. So I'm going to start with the first one. It's actually the first question that was posted because it seems quite topical, and that's to do with the vaccine. And actually, through all the previous sessions, this has come up a number of times. And it's, are optometrists and also those that work in the whole of the optometry primary care team likely to be seen as a priority for vaccination? Whoever wants to take that.
So Richard, my expectation would be that as with access to PPE, can you still see me? My computer is... Yeah. Restarting. Okay, good. I can't see you anymore. Sorry about that. That as throughout this pandemic, those who work in this sector will be seen as priority patient-facing staff, and that as plans are worked through for vaccinating staff, I would expect this group to be included.
Okay, so I guess the message is that there is a possibility of being included, but to kind of watch this space.
Yes, I think that's right. We're still waiting for further detail.
Brilliant. Okay. Moving on, there's a number of questions have come in that are all around extended services and how those services are commissioned. So two parts to this question. The first bit, and this is posed very much with a kind of Ccgs experience, is there any possibility that extended services could be commissioned nationally? And secondly, what kind of support or influence can NHS England NHS Improvement give to local commissioners in commissioning those services? So Richard or Carol, I guess, for that one.
So I guess I guess we learned an awful lot, didn't we, Richard, whilst we were developing the Ccgs pathway back in April. And I think the simple answer to are we likely to be able to commission additional services centrally, I think is unlikely based on our experience from COVID, because we pursued that option. I think the other thing that was clear from Ccgs is that the difficulty in engaging with CCGs across the country. I think it took about 4 weeks, as Gabby referenced earlier, to develop the pathway and to get the pathway endorsed by the colleges. And I think we're still probably trying to get that commissioned in some CCGs across the country. I think we had a degree of success where existing MECs were in place. So the question around how we can support it, I think we also try to use all the avenues open to us with Ccgs also, Richard, through the regional teams, through the LEHN chairs, frankly, everybody that's got a kind of an existing relationship with colleagues from secondary care. Could we do that better? Yes, I think we can. I think there were learnings that we can take from Ccgs, bearing in mind that was done in super quick time, and we were thinking on our feet as we were going along. But I think taking lessons away from that, I think we could probably do a better job. But there is still the challenge, fundamentally, of reaching out to those CCGs individually. That challenge will become less difficult when they start forming into ICS footprints, and we have increasing number of lead CCGs. It simply reduces the number of organisations we've got to connect with. Carol, I don't know if you've got anything else to add.
No, and the only thing I would add is the question, and checking with Richard Whittington, was your question whether it could almost be incorporated into a GOS framework, or was it the framework for extended services being produced nationally? It
was more the second piece. So extended services within the existing commissioning arrangements. How can we? I guess what's really behind it is, given we have the commissioning structures that we have, how can we ensure that there's some kind of level of consistency across the whole of England? Because at the moment, whilst Ccgs has moved things forward quite a lot, actually, we've still got at least 25% of the country that's not covered by a Ccgs or MECs type service. And how do we push that forward in that 25%?
Yeah, I guess one of the fundamental driving forces behind that is going to be the work of the Outpatients Transformation Board and the aspiration of moving things from secondary care into the community setting. I think it will evolve as that programme gets more traction underway. And it's possible that they may be able to influence some form of national framework.
Yeah, okay. Also, I think this is probably a relatively useful question, in that some of the stuff that's coming through, we're talking about ICSs, and to some extent we're even talking about primary care networks. I wonder if someone could just spend 2 minutes actually explaining exactly what an ICS structure may look like. Obviously, I'm quite steeped in it, and quite a lot of us are quite steeped in it, but I think sometimes if you're delivering services on the ground, maybe you're not quite so steeped in it. So could someone explain exactly what an ICS could look like, and also how its interrelationships with things like LOCs and certainly local eye health networks could evolve. Who wants to take off?
Okay, shall I kick off, and then I might hand over to Carol to talk about how the second part of your question. So I'll just describe at a high level how an ICS structure could work. So integrated care systems have been forming across the country over the last 18 months or so. And they vary in scale, but if we take an example in London, then an ICS covers, we've got about 5 ICSs in London. And then underneath that, at the place-based level, is about the scale of a local authority. So the ICS covers perhaps multiple acute trusts who may work together to be delivering some more specialised services and cancer services, for example. There may be a number of community trusts and mental health trusts within that patch. And then what we'd expect is that more primary care commissioning and strategic planning will take place at a place-based level, more akin to a local authority level, working in partnership with the local authority. And then underneath that, you've got the primary care network level, which we describe as the neighbourhood level, which is just around 50,000, say, a number of about 30 to 50,000 patients, and therefore you've got about 5 general practices and perhaps slightly more or less Optum practices than that. Carol, I don't know if you want to pick up the last part of the question then around
sure.
how.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Gabby. I think it is recognised that there has been some challenges in local eye health network chairs actually getting a seat at the table at an STP, PCN, ICS level. I don't know how many more acronyms I can get in one sentence there, but I'll give it a good go later on. What we are planning on doing is we recognise as well that our local eye health network chairs probably don't meet collectively to share good practice and share ideas of how it's been successful in some regions and far more challenging in other regions. But what has been the successful driving force for those regions who have actually got the seat at the table and are driving some radical changes at that local level? What we're planning on doing is similar to what we do with our local dental network chairs, is actually bringing the LEHN chairs in to the meetings with commissioners and heads of primary care, where that good practice and how they've opened those doors can be shared. As Gabby's slide said, there is a consultation out there at the moment. I would encourage everybody to have a look at the document and feed through to the consultation, either via the survey or via the email address that is available there. I think that's, with the LOCs at the moment, the statutory requirement is with NHS England. I think working with the LOCs and working with the LEHN chairs collectively, we can actually look at how can we transform eye health services for the benefits of patients.
Yeah. Okay. So one other supplementary question about this, it's quite a simple one really, is that someone's asked here that everybody should have an LEHN, but obviously not everybody does. So is the commitment from NHS England that ultimately the whole of England, every area working in England will ultimately have an LEHN that could represent them at that kind of regional level?
Yeah, sure. So the aspiration is that everybody has an LEHN chair to cover the needs of the population that they're seeking to serve. I think we should recognise as well that those regions that have got an LEHN chair, the capacity and the commitment in terms of hours varies radically across England. We did some work just pre-COVID, I think it was probably January time, Richard E., where we met at the Pocklington Trust with the LEHN chairs to actually find out what capacity was out there. Richard, is there anything you wanted to add on the back of that meeting at Pocklington?
Just that we just recently started to pick that piece of work up again, because as everybody will appreciate, we've been kind of pretty much preoccupied with managing the optical response to COVID. So we're just in the process of picking up some of these programs. That's one of them. In fact, I've had some recent exchanges to understand where the HN chairs currently sit across the country, where there are gaps. And once we've completed that piece of work, then we can try to influence it. These appointments are made at a regional level, as colleagues will know. So we're unable to mandate the recruitment of an NHN chair, but we can do a lot to encourage it and influence it. And this is part of the work that we'll be doing to do that.
Brilliant. Thank you, Richard, and thank you, Gabby. So I think what I'm taking from this is we've got this evolution of a whole range of different organisations at different levels, and what we have to do is knit these together into something that's consistent in terms of being able to influence delivery and influence commissioning. Am I kind of there with that one?
Yeah, I would say so.
Okay, so I'm going to move us slightly off of that subject, but onto a subject now, which I think probably a third of all the questions are about, which is around connectivity. And I know, Richard, this is almost certainly going to be one for you. I wonder whether or not, obviously, Richard, you and I have had a number of conversations about connectivity over the years. So I wonder whether or not, to start with, it's worth highlighting two things. Exactly where the thinking is, and we talked about the DPS in Gabby's presentation. For a lot of people, they probably won't know what the DPS is, and maybe we can just outline a little bit about what the intent behind that is.
So I think the first thing to say, and so I for the NHS England, I've been leading the connectivity program for 2.5 years now, and I think the first thing to say is that the landscape has changed completely in light of COVID from the program I was managing pre-COVID, and the requirements of a connectivity solution I think now are completely different. So where we are with in terms of kind of priorities right now with connectivity, and Gabby touched on this a little bit earlier, is that the development of the COVID pathway is being undertaken by the outpatient transformation program. Those pathways are taking priority because they are an essential part of the restoration phase we are in currently through COVID, and so there is a desire to implement those pathways as quickly as possible. Connectivity, of course, is a key enabler of those pathways, fundamental to facilitating that. The challenge with connectivity for those pathways is the file size images that are required to be transferred from primary care to secondary care and vice versa. We're talking primarily about OCT images. EOS is unable to do that, and that's kind of forced the issue really to have to look beyond EOS to see what alternative solutions there are out there. And there are, of course, many. And one of the other challenges we have is that, in the 2.5 years, the landscape has changed in terms of the number of different solutions being used by regions across the country. And many of those regions are wedded to their existing solutions. So that complicates things a little bit further. So I think the important thing around the connectivity is to say that what we don't want to achieve is a multitude of different platforms for COVID referrals, for GOS referrals. What we want to see is consistency as much as we can. And I think that consistency is likely to come at a regional level, not a national level. But I think there is an intention and desire to make sure that a single referral solution is commissioned and deployed for all manner of referrals, whether they are GOS referrals or whether they are COVID related referrals. So I think that's the ambition. The DPS that you refer to is a procurement system that effectively speeds the whole procurement process up, Richard. And so providers have been invited to express interest in participating in this framework. That invitation, I think, went out a couple of weeks ago. And I think providers have 30 days from the time that was available to respond. And they will have to meet the technical specifications, the technical requirements we've specified for a referral platform. And those that are able to meet that technical requirement will be put onto a framework, and commissioners can then commission a mini competition, if you like, to then get to a price point for the deployment of the platform. So we anticipate that this is going to happen probably at an ICS footprint level, and I guess it's although it's not a national solution, I think it's probably the next best alternative, given the point I made about lots of regions already being wedded to existing systems, and that's happened increasingly over the past 12 months. But still making sure that there is consistency across the referral platforms for both COVID and GOS referrals within that footprint.
Brilliant. Thank you, Richard. We just had a question saying, what does DPS stand for? So that's Dynamic Procurement System.
Yes.
That run away on that.
Yeah.
So taking that back, just because there's a lot of questions coming in about why things can't, why can't this be national? Why can't this be national? And that's completely understandable.
Yeah.
So when you talk about a specification or a minimum technical specification, does that mean the specification is effectively national, but then it gets delivered at a kind of ICS platform? Is that what the aim of this is? Exactly
that, yeah. So, so the first part of the question, why not a national solution? I think we all understand the benefits of having a national solution. I just think the landscape now just makes that very difficult, Richard. It would mean that some regions who've been working with existing platforms for a number of years, for example, up to, in some cases, would have to completely change that platform. That means everybody that from optoms and the acute sector having to redeploy something totally new. The disruption it would cause is significant, and unfortunately across the regions now, in the absence of a national solution, that's becoming commonplace. But yes, so the technical specification would be set at a national level, so the capability of the platform, whichever platform is deployed, is going to be the same right across the country. Potentially, those platforms could differ from one ICS to another depending on existing solutions being deployed, for example.
Okay, fine. So local systems, national standards. So I guess the aim then is for interconnectivity between the systems.
Exactly that.
Right. Okay, that's great. Right, I want to move us to one of the other slides actually, which was the data slide about the recovery. And I've had two questions that have come through on this, and they're quite simple. The first question is the data definitely correct? And the second question is saying that they don't recognise their locality in that data. So I wonder if you could elaborate a little bit more on what you think is behind what looks like quite a quick bounce back.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of don't recognising the data, I can completely understand that, and I think Abby made a reference to that. So that's obviously the national picture. I think the first thing to remind everybody is it's payment dates. It's not necessarily activity, because we have this situation where we have 6 months to submit a GOS form. So that graph shows payment dates, but all things being equal, 1 month should still be relative to another, because that's the history of how we collect this data. So the graphs are showing a national picture, and that collectively across, the point that Gabby was making, across August and September, October, looking very strong recovery. That is the national picture. But we do understand that, there's a vast difference between the capability of some practices in terms of the volume of activities they can deliver versus others. And we're talking about, size of the practice, number of clinics, people resource, all these things which influence the number of patients that can be seen. So it is an overall picture, but we're fully aware that there are, we need to drill down into that data to get a clearer picture of where that is happening and where it's not happening, and that's something that we're planning to do. It's a kind of watch this space. That is the pictures you're seeing at the moment, but there's further work ongoing, which I'm assuming is in conjunction with colleagues who from OFNC, which obviously people are aware that LOCSU is an observatory, but around that work. Yeah, and there's lots of reasons for that for that increase over the past couple of months, and one of them, of course, is the growth of EGOS, the use of EGOS, because of course, if you're submitting a claim electronically, you're submitting it more quickly and you're getting paid more quickly. And that's why we include the ECOS data there. And it was no coincidence that over the past 3 months, the number of claims submitted electronically has increased significantly. So there's a big influence there. So that's one of the things we've been able to unpick in terms of the activity levels.
Splendid. Okay, thank you for that. Another area that's come up, and unfortunately, Richard, I think it's probably you that's going to be on the hook for this one as well, is around special schools. And this question is really good because I think this sums it up really well. It says the special schools project is fantastic, as is the focus on Pathway for Learning Disabilities. But what support can NHS England give to promote its commissioning locally?
To commissioning it locally, well, I think the first thing to say is that we are now at the stage where we are launching this service. We'd actually reached the stage back in March, but then COVID came along and changed everything for everybody. So we're just kind of picking the program up again. We've recruited some dedicated people to help us move forward, and we are literally in at the phase now where we are recruiting schools and recruiting clinicians to deliver the service in those schools. We're concentrating in the Northwest at this moment in time, and I hope to be able to have clinicians actually working in a school for the first time delivering this service before the end of this financial year. We are going to the plan for the first 12 months. It was supposed to be this 12 months we're in now, but because of the delay of the service, likely to be the next 12 months now, the next year. The plan is to operate the service outside of GOS for the first 12 months because in order for the service to be commissioned through GOS, we need to make a number of regulation changes. One of those regulation changes, for example, is the fee. This is a brand new service. We wanted to be able to test some of the assumptions we've made about delivery of the service, including the fee, before committing it to regulations, because as everybody will be aware, once we commit something to the regulations, we're probably stuck with that for 2-3 years. It takes time to change regulations. So we wanted to make sure we use the first 12 months to prove concept that the work we've done to test the service model and to make sure that we've got everything right and working before actually then committing it to regulation. So that will follow, and then it will go into the GOS framework. Once it's in the GOS framework, I don't think the regions need to be encouraged because the service is going to continue to be rolled out through my team managing the special school service, and that will drive the demand.
Brilliant. Okay.
Does that kind of answer the question, Richard? Is that?
I think it's getting towards the question. I think the concern behind it, and I obviously I recognise that this is a different type of service, is that historically we've got to the point where we have these services specified. I mean, actually, in fact, the Ccgs is probably a really good example of one recently. We have the service specified, we have all the endorsement we can think of to get things moving, and then it silts up at a local decision-making level. And I think that's probably what's behind quite a lot of questions here, whether or not we're talking about services or whether or not we're talking about platforms or whether we're talking about development. And one of the things I'm going to come back to again is ICSs and PCNs in a minute. It seems to work at a national and a regional level, and it silts up at a local level. And I think for quite a lot of people on this call, that is their experience.
So I think the other thing I would say about the special school service is this is captured in NHS England's long-term plan. So it's an absolute commitment to deliver the service. And frankly, it's the inclusion in the long-term plan that's been the game changer for this service, because that inclusion meant that we had funding, and that's enabled us to do all the work we've done at the pace we've been able to do it. And that funding is in place for at least the next 4 years. And for the next 4 years, the dedicated team we've put around that service will continue to manage the implementation of it. Now, we have two challenges. COVID has caused some disruption to the schools, and some are maybe nervous about allowing new services in at this point in time. Increasingly, I have to say, as we're talking to schools now, that's less of an issue than we thought it was going to be. But what we do have is a workforce that we need to help upskill, because clearly this is a very different type of service. At the moment, there are very few existing clinicians delivering this service because it doesn't exist. But we have to make use of those clinicians to train the next wave. So one of the approach we're taking is to try to make this a national service as quickly as possible. By national, I don't mean coverage of every school, but we are not going to roll this out region by region. We will try to have small pockets of schools across the country, because then as we're training the workforce, that workforce becomes skilled and can train the next wave of workforce. And all the clinicians aren't bunched up in the Northwest or down in London, where we have to send them for new providers for training. So that's the approach we're taking. But I guess the point to make, Richard, is that we are managing that implementation through the dedicated team. We are ensuring that the service is rolled out nationally. So the regional teams will support that implementation. Excuse me. Clearly, they'll need to get involved with the recruitment of clinicians, the awarding of contracts, and so on. So they have a role to play, but we are driving the implementation through the dedicated team. And as demand increases, the size of that team will increase to accommodate that.
Brilliant, thank you. And I think there's a good question here, which I think is a very good question, but we probably not got time to really go into detail on it, which is special schools are really important, but what about screening for all schools and all children? And obviously we do, there's a pathway in the process.
So I think very quickly, if I can, it was always our ambition to improve access to services for the entire learning disability population, and that includes children in mainstream schools and it includes adults. That was always our ambition. We've said right from the word go that this was phase one. We felt it was a good starting point, and we felt that because if we can get these children used to wearing glasses, used to having eye tests, that would help drive demand for services as they move into adulthood, because we know one of the challenges where existing pathways exist is that demand is low. There are lots of reasons for that we don't have time to go into right now, but so this is phase one, and if you think about how it's going to educate schools, parents and children on the need for the service and help train up the workforce, that will help us when we come on to addressing the kind of wider issues for children and adults in other locations.
Brilliant, thank you very much. So I think this might be one for Gabby, actually, as we go forward. There's a lot of questions, again, around engagement or optical engagement with ICSs and primary care networks. And I think some of the experiences of some of the people are that PCNs and ICSs are seen as very GP-centric type organisations. So how can, I guess there's two parts to this question. Firstly, how can practices on the ground get involved with these organisations? And secondly, what can LOCs as organisations do to help support their development?
Yeah, so I mean, I think that it's true that in the early days of primary care networks, they have been relatively GP-focused organisations. There's a really good example of work that's been done with the community pharmacy sector. So map and align community pharmacies to those networks in order to facilitate closer working, and work that's been done about a referral pathway in between. And I think that is the first example of building in a wider set of providers into that network to make it a true neighbourhood of all the full range of primary care and out-of-hospital services that needs to come together within that neighbourhood. We, I think, need to do some more thinking together about what the opportunities are for closer working for the optical sector within that space as well.
Okay, that's brilliant. Well, I'm sure if I can make a plea on behalf of most of the attendees here, the LOCs are the vehicle for that local engagement, and if we can get LOCs involved in that development, I think that would be really, really useful. To broaden it, in terms of LOCs collectively, what can LOCs do to help NHS England and NHS Improvement reach their priorities?
So, I mean, I think as we enter into this period of engagement, and I would absolutely hope to hear from these organisations through the consultation, and that I hope that you'll engage with us and help us design the best way to get representation into these ICSs at the different levels that we've talked about, neighbourhood, place and ICS. This is the right moment to be talking about it, and we have time over the next year to then describe how we want this to work across the primary care system, and we should take it as an opportunity, because I think it is a good opportunity for all of us in primary care to get this more embedded and integrated within local systems.
Brilliant, thank you. I'm going to ask the last question in a minute. We have had so many questions coming through, and I just want to assure everybody that we've got them all here on record, and there are some that I haven't got to, But what we'll do is we'll go through them, and if we can, well, I'll obviously talk after this, and we can look to see whether or not we can do some written answers to some of the questions that we haven't picked up. So really, what I want to do just to close this segment of the session is to ask each of you, actually, and it's a question I asked at a previous session. In 2 years' time, and we have moved through the immediate pandemic and we're in this kind of recovery position. So in 2 years' time, what would you hope that things would look like in terms of your delivery against these priorities and in terms of how services are being delivered? It's an awkward question. I don't know who wants to start that one, but someone stick the hand up or I'll pick someone.
I can't find out how to get my hand up, sorry.
That's all right, that's fine. Carol, go on.
Go on, I'll go first. I think in 2 years' time, where I feel I would like to see optometry is having a platform and for everybody's voice to be heard. We actually go through and we set some work priorities for the team. I think it would be fundamental to engage with the profession to actually sense check, are these priorities the right priorities? Are we missing something? Sorry, I'm smiling. I've just seen Gabby's just got ambushed by a little boy.
This is one of those YouTube moments, I think.
Yes, she did. So 2 years' time, where I'd like to see things is every child, whether they be in a special school, in a community, in a mainstream school, has access to eye health and eyesight testing. I'd like to have priorities for the sector actually done in collaboration with the profession. I'd like to have a seat at a table, be it at whatever level. And someone did actually put in one of the questions, can we stop using acronyms? So LEHN is Local Eye Health Network Chair. I'd like to see Integrated Care Systems is ICS. Primary care networks, PCN level, everybody actually working together for the benefit of all citizens.
Thank you, Carol. And I think you make a really good point there. And I'm as guilty of this as anybody. We talk in acronyms, we talk about these things because we know what they are. And sometimes we're too distant. We need to recognise that other people do not know what these things are. So one commitment from me is that we stop using acronyms. Richard.
I think for me, I'd like to see a landscape where there is just a lot more collaborative working across primary and secondary care, Richard. I think COVID has forced that issue out of necessity, and perversely, one of the benefits I think to come out of COVID is that it's probably taken a couple of years off achieving the objective of having people, clinicians across both sectors working more collaboratively, because it has kind of forced the issue. So I'd like to think in 2 years that is becoming more of the norm. And I think as a result of that also, then that there is a greater mix of services and a more appropriate mix of services in the respective locations. In other words, there are more additional services being delivered from primary care settings, leaving the hospitals to focus on the work that needs to be undertaken in those locations. So for me, I think if within 2 years' time, that is closer to becoming the norm, and we've got in place by that time the connectivity platforms across the country to facilitate that, because that's a fundamental enabler, then I think that would be pretty good progress and beneficial to the entire eye care sector.
Brilliant. Thank you, Richard. Now, I'm not sure if Gabby's going to be able to answer or not. No, I can see the microphones come on. So Gabby.
I'm back. And it's just me. So yeah, I think so I agree with everything that Carol and Richard have said, and I guess for me, just on the commissioning side of things, over that period of time, I think we'll see more mature ICS level commissioning, and I hope place-based commissioning, and collaborations of providers across the primary care and out of hospital sector working really closely to get together, well connected by technology, and able therefore to deliver more preventative and proactive care in the community. And I think the special schools, the schools project that we've been talking about today is just one example of the really good initiatives that we may see, and the creative ways of commissioning these services that I hope we'll see more and more of within that system.
Splendid, brilliant. I think that's a really, really good place to end this, actually. What I'd like to do is, one of the things I'll come on to in about 20 minutes is to talk about how the NOC may develop, and if we can revisit this kind of discussion in this kind of way. And I mean, who knows, maybe in a year's time we can actually sit in the same room rather than be in the same room virtually, albeit, as we were discussing earlier, I think we're all going to have to relearn how to sit in the same
skill.
We all got quite used to this. So yeah, if we can all sit in the same room and have these discussions all the time, I think it's really useful to keep a dialogue open so that we have that continual feedback. Absolutely, from the ground's a horrible term, but from the delivery phase to the policy, I think the closer we can make that gap, the shorter it is. I think the more successful any type of service will be. So thank the three of you for doing this. I think it's been a really, really useful discussion, and one that will continue for the foreseeable future. What I'm going to do now is I'll invite Carol, Richard, and Gabby, if they obviously more than welcome to stay. Keep cameras on, turn them off. I really don't mind. But what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take us back to what the session was originally billed to be, which was going to be a review of where we got to at the last NOC in 2019, a look at the delivery and what happened over the pandemic, and then a discussion about where we move in the future. Now, because we prioritised the session we've just had, I think that final bit about the discussion in the future we are definitely going to have, but I think we'll have it in a different type of format. But what I want to do now is set the context, I think, for that discussion. So if I take the second priority first, which was to look at the action during the pandemic, we had a session, and I'm sure a lot of you were at this session. We had a session last week about what the response to the pandemic was like. So rather than repeat that, I would invite you all, those who haven't seen it or those that want to review it again, I'd invite you all to go to the LOCSU YouTube channel, which you can access via the LOCSU website. And there's a recording of that session, and you can watch it at your leisure, and also you can watch it at double speed if you want to whip through it. There's obviously questions and comments you can make on that recording. If there's anything you want asked, make a comment in there, and we can debate and we can acknowledge that, or send an email to info@LOCSU, or send it to me personally, and we can pick through that. And whilst, as we've just heard, we've just had 45 minutes of talking about the future, but also talking about the pandemic. Whilst there's absolutely no doubt that the focus for LOCSU, the focus for every single one of you, the focus for LOCs has been the management through the pandemic and how we were able to continue to provide emergency and urgent services, as well as routine site testing for the second lockdown. Whilst that's very, very clearly been the priority, and as I see it said at every session, we should be completely proud of how, as a sector, we responded. What I want to focus on really is those priorities we set out in 2019, to see how many of them we actually did deliver against. I was going back through the report, and actually there's quite a number that partly through the pandemic management we have done. So I'm going to take us through 9 areas very, very quickly. It's not going to be a huge session this, but just to outline the work that we've done, the work that you've done, and also then to set that as the areas we want to discuss as we move forward, and certainly as we pull out of the current phase and into recovery. So one of the first areas that we discussed last year was pathways and the development of pathways. And at that particular point, I don't think nobody could have predicted what was going to happen in 2020. And in reality, no one would have predicted the queue service. But what's happened with the Q service? The Q service was designed with two things in mind. It was very much a COVID response service. It was a service to enable us to continue to operate, but it was also an evolution of a minor eye condition service. And Zoe and I and others, when we were formulating the specification, were very aware that what we wanted to be able to do was to leave something behind that could be built on outside of Qs or outside of the COVID response. So through that, we were very clear to prioritise the fact that there had to be some kind of shared decision making. We wanted to be able to have the service based around about a clinical prioritisation process. And we also very, very, very crucially wanted to be able to utilise core clinical competency. Yes, there is a place for extended qualifications, and there always will be. But I think one of the things we really need to ensure is that we extend the core competency as much as we possibly can, and then move on to the extended piece. And that was also why within Qs, there was the beginnings of the mainstreaming of things like IP. And I hope that whilst the Q service was a COVID service, what we will actually see is that evolve into a different type of service. And we see as we develop pathways, we don't develop separate pathways for cataract. We don't develop separate pathways for glaucoma. But we start to develop a holistic primary care service. And that's where I think the pathways, that's what I think we talked about in 2019, and that's where we need to develop too. And a lot of that will be built on the work that LOCSU and partners are doing with the outpatient transformation program. Because I think those that were on that call, the first one we did, would have heard that that's very much the mantra that program's trying to deliver. And again, if you haven't seen that session, go to the YouTube channel and you'll be able to watch that one. The next thing we discussed was around digital support. And I think we've heard quite a lot about digital support tonight and connectivity. And certainly through the questions that you've asked, I've heard absolutely that there is a requirement to get the connectivity issues sorted as quickly as we can, and for them to be as consistent as possible across the whole of primary care delivery. And I think every one of us would sign up to that. There are also a couple of other areas we talked about. We talked in 2019 about LOC Online and the evolution of websites and web connectivity for LOCs. And post the session, we launched the LOC Online service. And I know some LOCs have already engaged with this, and have the feedback to me around that has been really, really positive. We will be writing to all LOCs this side of Christmas about the evolution of this service. And in particular, one of the pieces that was asked for was about the delivery and the availability of LOC forms email addresses, and that's something we've been looking into. So each of you will be contacted before Christmas to discuss how we can deliver that. And the other thing that we talked about, which if I think back to this time last year was absolutely central to everything, was clinical systems. And clinical systems, and particularly the systems for the delivery of extended services, have just the revolution that's taken place really in the last year, which has largely speaking been driven by COVID, is incredible. For the majority of people on this call, you're probably going through a process, those of you that deliver extended services, going through a process of utilising Opera. And Opera's certainly the system of the moment, and there's been a lot of debate around Opera and a lot of people looking at what it can and can't do, and particularly what it can do. But it's not all about Opera. It's also about other systems that other different primary eye care companies use. So it's not an Opera thing, but I think what we're seeing is the development of systems for extended services and moving at a really quite rapid pace. Obviously, alongside that, there is the withdrawal of the Opto Manager and Opto Pay system, which is also being managed. And for those of you involved directly in that, again, my thanks to you, because this is not an easy transference. And it's been managed, I think it's been managed well so far. We are absolutely committed to being able to move away from the systems by the end of January. And certainly everything in terms of timetable and contracting is online for that. And I want to thank all of you for the work and the support you've given me as we've done that. And I also, at this point, do want to thank the people in Sedgedon, because there's work that they've been doing, and they've been very supportive as we start to think about the next wave of clinical systems. The third area we discussed last year was around the needs analysis work, and an awful lot of LOCs have engaged with their optical leads and the needs analysis tool, which has evolved again as LOCs have engaged with the process. I don't really want to talk a lot about that, but if there are any LOCs out there or any individuals within LOCs who want to understand more about the needs analysis or haven't engaged in the process, please do contact your optical lead or contact LOCSU, and we will be able to facilitate that process. The key thing about the needs analysis work, and the key thing that was drawn out of the NOC last year, was that this needs to be completely LOC owned. It's facilitated by LOCSU, but the analysis is a dynamic tool owned by LOCs, and particularly looking at things like succession planning. And I think where it's been most successfully utilised, that has been the model, and it's certainly the model that we want to continue with. We talked also last year about student engagement, and maybe more than students, maybe more about LOCs engaging with people new into the profession and into primary care. And some of you will know, some of you may not know, that we did a session for students yesterday, which for me was a learning curve, but it was really useful. By the end of that session, we've got a feeling for what I think we may need to start to think about doing. And there's certainly a connectivity piece to be done between LOCs and education establishments of all types. It's not just about optometry. This is about education. This is about the whole of the primary care team and the delivery of education to the primary care team. And I think there is a piece of work, certainly for early 2020, that I want to take forward with LOCSU to help support that with LOCs and to support those links between LOCs and the organisations delivering education, so we can bring people into the LOC fold a bit earlier. One of the discussions yesterday was about how the students are the future of the profession, and it's obvious, of course they are, but it'd be really good if we could make them the future of LOCs as well and really bring in a younger cohort. Last year's NOC, one of the key things we discussed in a number of sessions was about regional working. And at that point, we were talking about the formation, it seems bizarre, the formation of regional forums. And I think what has happened over COVID is that those regional forums have completely flourished. They've been different in different areas. Some areas have moved faster than other areas. But I think overall, across the whole of the country, we've seen LOCs coming together, working together, sharing information, sharing experience through those regional forums. And it's really helped, I think, partly also for engagement with the wider NHS. Some of those forums, not all, but most forums do have regional NHS England team members coming to them and presenting to them. And it really does start to build that partnership between the provider and the commissioner and the LOCs and NHS England. And it's absolutely something to build on. One of the things we talked about was the formation of a national forum, and that's certainly going to come. And I think we'll talk about that when we start talking about the NOC in a minute. But again, the thing that's drawn out of this, and the thing that I'm absolutely committed from a LOCSU perspective, is that these are LOCSU facilitated forums, but they are LOC owned. And where they have been at their most successful, it has been where LOC members, all members, have driven the agenda and have driven those forward. It's not about us saying this is how it should work or how it shouldn't work, because that's not what it's about. It's about LOCSU facilitating, but it's very much about LOC ownership. And I'm really, really encouraged with the feedback we've had around those. Alongside that, there was also a conversation about expanding the optical lead team. And I think at this point, I really want to kind of indulge myself to some extent and pay tribute to the optical lead team, because as with all LOCs, there's this, we've never had a busier year. It's been incredible, the amount of work that LOCs have managed to get through and have managed to drive, and also the work that the optical leads have been able to support. And I'm completely proud of every one of them, and I really, really want to thank them. But one of the questions that was raised was whether or not we could expand that team. And it's something that I want to look for 2021. It was certainly something I wanted to do in 2020, but with the budgets and not knowing quite how COVID was going to roll, it wasn't something we could do in this year, but it's still absolutely on the agenda and something that I want to look at. And I think linked with that, there's also education and training. Everyone's aware that LOCSU provides education and training to all LOCs, and any LOC member is entitled to partake in that. Over the course of this year, we did two things. We started a review of that training to make sure that it's actually fit for purpose and it meets the needs of 2020 and beyond. And there will be some changes to a lot of the courses as we go through that process. But we've also shifted away from the virtual platform that we were using and onto a different and newer platform, which I think allows much greater engagement. It's certainly easier to navigate, but I think it also helps really drive those courses and those opportunities forward. And again, in slightly indulgent fashion, I want to thank Simone Mason, who's the digital and learning lead for LOCSU, because she's driven that work. And it's a piece of work that wouldn't have been done without her drive, actually. So I think everybody, if you want to take up those training opportunities, if there's anybody in the LOC that wants to take those training opportunities, whether or not it's induction, whether or not it's treasurers, I think this is the point where we should mention that we brought the treasurers for all of the LOCs together. And I hadn't realised for a lot of treasurers, it was the first time they'd actually come together on a regional basis. And it's something that we absolutely need to continue along the same vein, really, as the regional forums. And I think they were well-rated sessions, and we've agreed that we're going to put together a kind of dynamic treasurer's guidance pack, and something that I want to take forward across a whole level, all levels of certainly the officer roles in LOCs, to help support and drive that work locally. It's going to be completely crucial when we think about what we've just heard about how ICSs will develop, and particularly about how primary care networks will develop, that we have the tools in place to be able to take advantage of the opportunities when they arise. Communications, there was a lot of criticism, quite rightly, around the way in which communications had been in the past. And I think this year, from my perspective, we've changed pretty radically in how we do things. One of the things we were asked to do was to do communications on a multi-channel level, which I think we've done. We make much better use of social media. The whole YouTube thing is something that was completely alien to me, but is beginning to drive forward with this. We've also this year delivered more in way of sort of campaigns. So the Your LOC campaign that people will know about, that's running in conjunction with this NOC event, has been really successful. And I'm really, really encouraging the way in which different LOCs have run with that. And some of the stuff that's come out has been really, really brilliant, and is a lesson certainly to me. We've done podcasts, and I've seen those, the listenership of those podcasts has slowly risen. First one, it was very low, but we've had hundreds of people listening to those podcasts. Again, completely alien to me when I started it, but I think we're getting better slowly. I was allowed to do the last one, not on my own, but without being chaperoned. So things must be moving in the right direction. For anybody who wants to engage with those, who wants to learn about those, or even if you wanted to be part of one, you can get access via the LOCSU website. Mail me directly. I'm really enthused by how the opportunities that this provides. So we were also asked very specifically to deliver an AGM presentation that highlighted the different structures within LOCSU, but also highlighted how LOCSU linked up with other sector bodies, which I think we did, and I understand was well received. And in response to kind of opening up the board to scrutiny, but also so that you recognise who your board members are, we've started a Meet the Board piece within the newsletters, which will continue. And I hope that starts to open up what the board is and who the people on the board are. And in particular for LOCs, who your local board representatives are. Because if LOCs have got concerns or have questions, it is completely appropriate for those to be raised through those representatives. And they can bring that directly to the board, or they can bring it directly to me, and you'll always get a response on that. So the final thing I want to talk about when we're talking about 2019, but also where we might be going, is actually this event, which is the NOC. I think that this year we have just scratched the surface of what an NOC could look like. we normally at each NOC get about 200, maybe 220 people attending. That's often limited by the capacity in the venue. But this year, in terms of unique attenders, we've had just under 400. So it's not probably as much as I thought we might get when we were first thinking about how we do this virtually, but it's a near doubling of the audience. And I know there'll be a number of people who've attended NOC sessions for the first time. And I think this does show what this could be in the future. Delivering it, when we thought about delivering this virtually, I thought that it might be easier. It's not. It's actually quite hard to deliver these things virtually. And in my list of thank yous, I really want to thank everybody who's been involved in this, but there's one person in particular I want to thank, and that's Liz, who, when you see moderator on the screen, that's Liz. She may or may not want to stick her camera on at this point, but she sat behind every single one of these sessions and has absolutely kept me in line, which is a good thing. And they're not easy to do. So my personal thanks to her for helping drive this platform, because it hasn't been easy and it has been a learning curve. And I think it has been successful. But where I think we could take the NOC, and it's something I'm really keen to discuss when we come to how we take things forward in the future. Where I think we could take this is, the NOC has always historically been a 2-day event. It doesn't need to be a 2-day event. It could be a 12-month event. We can have these kind of sessions, these kind of debates all of the time. And I think we should be thinking about whether or not we have, rather than the NOC being an event, the NOC is kind of like a brand. And yes, we have that one-off event. We bring everybody together. You cannot replicate the networking and then the enthusiasm you get from an event virtually. It's the one thing you can't do. But you can do more virtual sessions. We can do more stuff, and we can flex and address the issues of the day if we change maybe how we do this. So that's something to take forward in what I'm going to come to now, which is the next phase. So what I really want to do now is outline how we're going to take this forward and think about how we can do it. When we thought about doing this session, the idea would be that we might break down into different groups and discuss what we want to do over the next year, the next 2 years, but we haven't quite got that opportunity. So what I want to do is set up a series of regional events where we can talk to all LOCs, and actually anybody who wants to come is absolutely welcome to come to these events, and talk about what will 2021, 2022 look like for LOCs, and by definition for LOCSU, as we start to pull out of the pandemic and move into a recovery period. And I think this is really important, because I think this will set the direction for the next 2, 3, 4 years as we start to see the evolution of the NHS that we've learned about over all of the sessions over these 2 weeks. So there's a couple of ways we can do this. If LOCs felt that they wanted to use their regional forums for this piece of work, that's great. But as I said before, that's very much an LOC decision. If not, we can set up some forums, but I want to do it quite quickly. I think probably to get it done over, certainly if we can, through January, so that we can come out and we can really set as a partnership between LOCSU, LOCs, and everybody involved in LOCs. We can set forward what we want to do as a community and how we can really help to drive that engagement, which is going to be for the benefit of everybody. So the optical leads will help lead that. They will contact every LOC, ideally before Christmas. We'll move it as fast as we can, and we'll work out how we can really set up and set those sessions up so we can get a genuine engagement and a genuine consultation as to where everybody moves forward. So with that, this is the last session of what has been an incredibly hectic 2 weeks. So I really just want to wind up with a series of thank yous, really, because it's been an incredible year. It's been a year that no one's going to forget. It's certainly been a year that no one will want to go through again. But as I said in the introduction to this, we really should be proud of what we've achieved as a sector, what we've managed to maintain as a sector, and how we've managed to engage with things going forward. And that's tribute to each and every one of you on this call, because it's you that's done it. We've tried to provide the support, but you're actually the ones that have delivered this on the ground, and we must not forget that. And I've said previously in every session that it's come at a cost. It's come at both a personal cost and it's come at a professional cost. And I'm really, really aware of that. And I really hope that over Christmas, all of us get some time just to sort of step down, to recharge, but also to reflect, because 2021, I think, will be better than 2020, but it's not the vaccine and how everything's moving at the moment. It's not a silver bullet. We're still going to be dealing with the consequences of this a year, 2 years down the line, albeit I really hope that by the time we get to the spring, we're starting to see a real corner being turned. So my first thanks is to every single one of you, every LOC, every LOC, every LOC officer, every LOC committee, all of the primary eye care companies who've all worked tirelessly to maintain these services. My own personal thanks go to Mike Fegan, our chair, who hasn't been able to attend these because of other commitments, but also the LOCSU board, who've helped us steer through certainly the rockiest year that I can remember. And also to all of my other sector colleagues, as I think Peter Hampson said in the first session when we were talking about OFNC and the OFNC response, people will be aware that LOCSU is an observer to OFNC, and I sit in that kind of observation position. I like to think that I'm a vocal observer, but certainly in the early days of the pandemic, and Peter said this, I think we probably saw more of each other than we saw of our families, because it was so hectic about the things that were moving through. So a huge thank you to everybody involved in that work. And I think we should be proud of the way everybody was able to support each other, as I said, going forward. My thanks also to the LOCSU core team, who have been working virtually as everybody else has, as well as the optical leads in being able to maintain the work that they do to support everybody in really quite challenging circumstances. Now, this one is going to embarrass someone here. I'm not normally a fan of thanking individuals. It's not really what I do. But I'm going to make one exception here in that, and I don't think anybody either within LOCSU or even in the audience will really object to this, and that's to thank Zoe, because she, in terms of the queue service and in terms of how we managed to develop stuff forward, she went way, way, way beyond the call of duty. And certainly at times when we've all sat there and thought, blimey, are we actually going in the right direction, or am I being completely barking? It's been really, really helpful for me to have somebody who can tell me that, yeah, you are being barking, or actually, no, it's things are going in the right direction. So I think that's a thank you on behalf of everybody for the work that she's done, particularly around the services, and a very specific thank you for me for kind of keeping us sane. Thank you to everybody for coming to this session. As I said, I hope you do get a chance to have a bit of a break over Christmas, and actually, because people aren't going to come together like this before Christmas, to wish everybody a really, really happy Christmas and hopefully a good new year. And I really, really look forward to engaging in the future about how we should take things forward.